there is a...
More chair?
Yes, more chairs.
Okay.
Chairs here.
I met you before.
Yes, you met him in Kamień during seminar 2 years ago.
Yes, I remember Mark Whitaker. Yes,
We were
okay.
discussing different things behind the table while drinking other stuff as well.
Yeah.
Okay, just a quick word. I think that I don't need to give an introduction, but just to meet formal aspects, this is our guest, Professor Mark Whitaker, or Dr. Mark Whitaker. I've been told by him that he already prepared in one of his slides some basic information about his background, so I'm not going to go into it. Yes, he came to us from South Korea, New York University. Yes, yes. So the floor is yours, and I hope that we will enjoy.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for coming. Probably I know this is your holiday, but I hope you enjoy this little quick tour of world history of media. As he said, I'm Dr. Mark Whitaker. My interests, or my PhD is in sociology, but I come from a department with a lot of environmental sociologists, so my interests are in environment, technology, and society interactions. And I'll just skip forward to my biography, 3 sections. I'll quickly summarize education awards and some research. I'm Dr. Mark Whitaker, PhD in Wisconsin-Madison. It's a very large school for sociology, maybe 70 or 80 professors, no joke. It's a massively obsessive place, and so I was in that crucible of obsessive sociologists for quite some time. And my interests, as I said, are really in red, environment, technology, and society interactions, but I am a historian by trade before that, undergraduate in world history, as well as comparative religious studies. But I'm also, here's the other degrees that I mentioned here, world comparative religious studies and world history with a concentration on East Asia. In other words, the most unspecialized sociology degree you can possibly have, right? So education, previous positions, I've been teaching at the university level from 2007 through 2019. In Korea, from 2007 actually. Been there at 3 different universities. First, a very elite women's university called Women's University, where I taught graduate and undergraduate courses in the sociology department. Then another university called Kumin University, and 7 courses, mostly undergraduate. And currently, I'm glad to be there, which is the Department of Technology and Society as the assistant professor, tenure track. And I've taught 6 courses, but also I've designed several courses into their official curriculum, mostly about mobile technologies. I've taught it about 5 times now since 2016. It's one of the specialization courses in a new emphasis in our department on ICT 4D, which stands for Information Communication Technologies for Development. And there are very few places in the graduate level that will train you in using technologies for mobile development, and even fewer on the undergraduate level. So we're very unique and pioneering, I think, to have developed that. And had to get it approved. That's the hard part, to get things approved from the New York branch, which has total control over the university. But anyway, education, past courses, I'll just quickly go through these. My point is I'm kind of a Renaissance style teacher. I taught a lot of different things, including network information society, comparative youth culture. Anyway, not to frighten you with all these things, but my point is I get very interested in long-term patterns and very holistic views about human development. I've got a National Science Foundation travel grant for my dissertation research, which was China, Japan, and Europe, about environmental degradation over 2,500 years. I even have a Korean National Science Foundation grant co-awarded with another professor, who's the chair of the sociology department, about political corruption and kind of a different theory about the origins of corruption instead of a third theory of criminality beyond anomie or criminal subcultures. And somewhat of an award, I'm really one of the first foreigners in Korea at the sociology department. So, a lot of my interests are in East Asia, so it's an ideal match, I think, to go there and to work. Anyway, awards, continuing. I added this just last night because there was some curiosity at a dinner. Presented at the United Nations headquarters in New York, as well as the Asian Development Bank. Model for sustainability called Commodity Ecology, and it's It's like a website, it's a platform, it's a social media platform for coordinating sustainable developments. How do you coordinate it? With 130 categories of material choices with sustainable options in each category with 867 distinct ecoregions. And so the idea is to create a real and virtual community in each of the 867 distinct ecoregions of the world in which they talk about the interactions of good ideas for material sustainability. And I call that commodity ecology because it's a way for people to create business incubation, local democratization, and greater sustainable development. And even the UN was kind enough to give me some web pages about that, actually, so right there. But to skip forward, 2 books per bioregional state. I've been thinking about political green constitutional engineering. So a lot of people were joking me like, this is a political science department, you know, you gotta say stuff. So this is my justification for living, right? I've done some work and I'm thinking about formal institutions and sustainability instead of it just being an issue of political parties per se. My dissertation became a book in 2009. It's really a kind of a green theory of history, showing a regularly chosen cross-cultural historical drift in political, economic, and cultural change, involved in expanding scales of environmental degradation, and meeting and organizing against it, the politics, economics, and cultures of environmental amelioration. So, and the structures of corruption, pressuring environmental degradation, and civic activism below it. I think that's a dynamic you can see in world history. Not just modern times. A lot of people think green politics are very new. I think they're very old. They're just catalyzed by particularly older religious discourses on 3 areas around health, politics, ecological regionalism and protection against extraction, and even technology and economic development for their regional selves, all within a church or some kind of monastic environment against the state or against the local aristocrat, per se. Anyway, just backwards. As I said, it's a lot of textual and archaeological analysis of these zones as commonly involved in the same process. So it's kind of a non-Eurocentric world history, really, because it's truly seeing Europe as just another case. Those are the colors of the books, pretty blue and green. I've kept that theme. But that's the book from 2005. And I was writing this while I was doing my dissertation, thinking of solutions potentially for this problem that I saw dealing with environmental problems. Anyway, back to the main talk today, media regimes and political dynamics throughout history. I'm not calling it political regimes, I'm saying political dynamics. And the caveat is I fail to argue the media regime to explain everything. Media is just one platform in our lives. It's not a substitutionary discourse. I'm not competing with Karl Marx. I'm not competing with any other reductionist. I'm just saying it's very interesting to look at this in addition to other factors that are important in history. And I think media regimes may change, though there is seldom any singular politics in a media regime, as plural media dynamics and political dynamics exist around that media regime, for it, against it, as well as different versions of it against each other. 4 definitions I think help before I begin what I call media regime. We'll discuss hegemony or saturation of a particular media platform, and I'll describe that in just a moment. Media dynamics or political dynamics, we'll discuss the changing political arrangements due to changes of media regimes. And what I mean by hegemony, in world history, I think when we think of media, there's 2 kinds of hegemony. One kind of hegemony is where at least 50% use it, and so it's culturally dominated by an aggregate use. But more likely, it's typically only a tiny percentage use it over a vast illiterate group without it. Think about scribal elites back in complex script times, where that lasted almost 2,500 years. So that's different kinds of hegemony. Since saturation, roughly judged, it's just an estimate where you had these multiplier effects when generally almost the entire population have equal access to some medium. And in the world history of media, I will argue that doesn't happen very often. I would argue we started with language, and we're really language creatures. So language is something we're embedded in. So 100% for most of us, 99%. So that's a saturated regime 1, I would say. Regime 1 of language might be equally saturated, but we're entering a regime 7, which I think are mobile ICT networks, which many countries already have over 90% saturation for smartphones. And this is altering, because this is injected into previous context and political institutions that were created under the older media regime. So it's rewiring politics, journalism, education, accreditation, as well as markets, labor, and even new financial currencies are developing, even around things you wouldn't expect, like Facebook or Twitter trying to develop their own currencies. Suddenly they would be some of the largest currency markets in the whole world if they were successful. So, instantly our world is changing. And most people, there's not enough books about this yet, of how revolutionary media changes have been. So my talk will mostly be in 4 sections, concentrating on these mobile ICT networks of our regime 7. And I'll describe what I mean by number 7 later. But another caveat, I'm suggesting media regimes and changes of media regimes have been neglected in understanding changing political dynamics in world history. And neglect of this variable benefits only other theories that do stress that they, and neglect of this variable only other theories that do stress that they can explain politics entirely with one variable. I'm thinking of theories of Marxism or theories of just formal institutional arrangements as totally autonomous factors in political science, but I'm not arguing these 2 other variables are unimportant. I'm only wanting here to concentrate on one variable that's neglected, I think, these media regimes, and that can be very important in changing political dynamics despite being very neglected by the worldviews of the 2 theories above. Theme 1, political dynamics of 7 media regimes. This is an adaptation of a class that I teach at an undergraduate level dealing with world history of media. And explore how we enter regime 7 quickly now, mobile ICT networks, after 120 years of slow change toward it. Slow change really began with the development of Marconi's wireless, which was 2-way actually at the beginning, but it was too complicated to commercialize a 2-way network. So it became very easily a production of images, and everybody listened to radio. You didn't participate. And so it quite quickly went from a very peer-oriented structure, innately, to a very unequal structure. Marconi hated radio, by the way. He thought, this is not my invention. So we're really recovering what Marconi thought would happen back in the early 20th century, of 2-way mass media, of everybody individually communicating. It was impossible then. There was no way to do the digital switching or connectivity then. Now, by the 1970s, you did develop a technology that allowed all these things quickly to coalesce once more. But media society mismatch is another topic and theme of the whole lecture, that mobile ICT networks are rewiring social life very rapidly. And thus they change the background social context of our past formal institutions linked to different media regimes. Rewiring state politics, as I said, journalism, education, religious recruitment, consumption, markets, labor, and currencies. 2 quotes, if you don't believe me, that people are aware of these mismatches. These are activist designers using mobile ICT networks for human development. And one of them is a female Argentinian inventor and programmer named Pia Mancini. And she said, we are 21st century citizens doing our very best to interact with 19th century design institutions that are based on the information technology of the 15th century. It's a great thing to say. But she's tried to invent a platform allowing deliberation in real time amongst large numbers of people, whereas the last time we had deliberation in real time was a Greek polis as a political institution. And she was suggesting that, well, all the political parties in my country, they can adopt this. They ignored her. So instead, they built their own political party, mandated its use, and they won some elections already. It's called Partido de la Red, which is Network Party in Argentina, if you're curious about that. She also has some TED Talks that I encourage you to go look, TED.com talk. Another quote from Charles Ledbetter, who got a grant to go through Africa 15 years ago, not like this year, but 15 years ago he said this, to look at how education is being changed across Africa. He said, the one technology that spans rich and poor alike in places like this, sub-Saharan Africa, is not industrial technology. It's not to do with electricity even or water. It's the mobile phone. If you were to design from scratch virtually any service in Africa, you would start now with a mobile phone. I think he said that in 2006, even before flat glass smartphones developed. But anyway, continuing this theme, my conceptualization of 7 media regimes is drawn from Harold Innis. How many of you have heard of Harold Innis? Nobody heard? Nobody. Extra credit if you have. Harold Innis I'll describe later to save time. But his view of geographic empires and regions of media, not really an evolutionary view of media history, but media as a geographic expression of core and periphery. And most media history comes from a core, and rural areas do not have access to it. Or radio stations disappear. Television stations historically being analog disappear. Now it's digital, it's go through wires. But historically there was actually a geography of media that we've sort of lost in this ubiquitous scale of our digital world now. But this historiography is more critical and distinct from universal, or linear, epoch, replacement media. A lot of people think, well, now that we're here, we've replaced the other. I see these as multiple layers. We're gathering more layers over time, and also some places skip certain points. Like China never got a simple script, but China actually was the first place in the world to do mass printing. A lot of Europeans and Americans, I think, still think, well, you need simple scripts before you do mass printing, because that's not really true. It's not true at all. In fact, for several hundred years, China and Korea were doing mass printing with complicated Chinese scripts. It just did not survive the decline of 2 states in the area. Anyway, this view of media, in other words, as I gave examples of, is open to a variety of discontinuities in a region's media history and social constructions and politics around media, instead of media tech determining politics. In this feedback loop, though, the qualitative way we interact with media gives different probabilities of success and failure, I think, to particular kinds of regimes. It doesn't mean it's impossible for everybody 100 years ago to own a television station. It could have been, but just it was unlikely to happen. So there's a potential of economic inequalities and transaction costs that have been huge problems in media, really until regime 7, where we are now, or mobile ICT. But anyway, it's hardly just a view of these 7 media regimes, because the media regimes can be different around the world, as each case has further important qualities of how their hegemony is constructed and whether they are a saturated media experience. South Korea has well over 94-95% smartphone saturation right now. North Korea basically keeps smartphones only in the party states. So that's a good example of hegemony based on a tiny percentage, which equally is a hegemony in South Korea, totally organized in a different way. One's more participative and deliberative, and another one is top-down, like older models of central media. Anyway, theme 2. It's a list of 14 theoretical terms to describe the sociological implications of living under different media regimes. Whether past or present, they can be analyzed using the same terms. This is, qualitative changes. It's from Innis, a man named Poe, and myself, for a total of 14 comparative terms to analyze how media regimes first sculpt our socialization and then change politics. Innis started with 2 in 1950. Poe added 6 more by, I think, 2008. And I've added 6 more by this year. The purpose of these terms is to more analytically, comparatively view media regimes and changes for the qualitative degree, how it feels to live under different conditions. There are qualitative feelings about the implications of all media, how they're experienced differently. You can judge them all, I think, on 14 different things. If you can think of another one, tell me. And thus for what is more or less probable or possible under different media regimes. Anyway, theme 3 describes basic scenarios of how the current mobile networks of regime 7 are being employed differently worldwide. How we use media regimes to construct political relationships is very flexible. And I'll give 3 very different futures that are being developed right now in these mobile ICT networks. Some are very democratic, some are very undemocratic. I'll skip forward in the interest of time. Theme 4, this kind of particular materialist analysis pioneered by Innis for media can be applied to all areas of social life. And I want to argue that we can analyze a lot of world history in 4 positional areas where the quality of who gets to dominate the structures in states, in science, religion, in consumption or finance. Those have particular biases in politics that suit a particular interest over others that are clientelized or rendered subaltern. I will list all these things are changing all four. Sort of give you one slide picture of our world immersed in these mobile ICT networks. Anyway, introductory quotes. How many have heard of Marshall McLuhan? Probably. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. Yeah. But Marshall McLuhan was channeling Ennis. They're the same university, University of Toronto. And all of Ennis's ideas went into the next generation. And Marshall McLuhan, theorist of media, really an English teacher at the University of Toronto, wrote a series of books through the 60s, 50s, into the early he died in 1980, the early 1970s, dealing with rapid changes in the media ecology that we live in. He called it media ecology. And how media ecology changes our psychological makeup as well. But he wrote an interesting phrase in this book: wedded as they are to 19th century industrial technology as the basis of class liberation, nothing can be more subversive of the Marxian dialectic than the idea that linguistic media shape social development, as much as do the means of production. Notice it doesn't say, I'm better than Marx. It doesn't say, this is more important. It just says, as much as. So it's one equal factor framing this topic. Anyway, in the world history of media changes, now I'm going to give you some background of where we are before I go into the 7 regimes. If we are living through an example of a major shift in communications media through what I would call sorry. It's really just a long phrase, but I'll give you abbreviation. All of these adjectives are important. This is where we're living now in the regime. It's computerized, it's wireless, it is telecommunications, it has to be digital, it has to be based on electricity, it has to be mobile, and it is multimedia. And my abbreviation follows this as called diamond democracy. If you remember diamond democracy, you can unpack carat weight. If you know how many females, carat weight, diamonds, carat weight democracy tree, mobile multimedia, MMM. So that helps you unpack those 7 issues that I think are equally important. The digital quality of this, of the storage medium, is really what began to coalesce everything into a single hub. But the abbreviation is really for saturated mobile ICT networks. This is the 7th communication regime. It's only begun really in the past 10 years, but as I said, it really had an early harbinger in the ideas and the dreams of what Marconi as well as Tesla wanted to do from 1890 through 1920. Suddenly it coalesced with the first iPhone in 2007. I go back, it's a historical document of very important, of Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone. Watch it on YouTube. Nobody knows what he's doing. It's like, there's no clapping. He has to keep saying, look, it's these things together. And they're like, I don't know if I really want to carry that around. I already have my iPad, I already have a computer, I already have a telephone. Why do I need a computer and a telephone together? The audience is very befuddled because it is a totally kind of new hub for our life. Anyway, lowering transaction costs for relationships. This is what it has done. It's changing real-time deliberation potentials, building a world of participation on virtual platforms in the hundreds of millions, larger than most countries. Facebook is the world's largest country with over perhaps 2 billion people. Censoring, though, and hardly open to equality, I think in the first generation of these platforms, but other platforms are developing, which I call second generation social media, which do have far more interest in civil rights and equality of political participation. Anyway, if past media hegemony, called Regime 6, was wireless one-way mass media broadcasting of major, powerful, singular voices, mass silent listeners. Think of Radio Free Europe, think of the Soviet Union, think of any state broadcaster. Example of mass electronic media, plus the older mass print. Those are all very centralized, centralized producers and decentralized consumers. So you're not really producers on an equal level yet. Even if you wanted to write some article and send it to the newspaper, there's no guarantee people will read it. They may throw it away. So now that's impossible. Now it will be published regardless of that. And the new censorship is on the level of search engines, but that's another story. So think of this change of Regime 6 into Regime 7 as into two-way mass media. This is another phrase of conceptualizing where we are. We're in two-way mass media world now, and that is bound to change political structures that have been built around the slow feedback of one-way mass media and the gatekeeping that comes with that. Anyway, ever cheaper, ever more mobile, ever autonomously networkable communications. And 5 points here: easier self-organized networks of very flexible communities are now coming into play. That was very hard to organize before. We called them political parties, but you have to subscribe to a newspaper, and then that's the way that the party funded itself. But now, you join, you follow or unfollow people all the time in a very flexible way, and it's changing the way we think about our allegiances. Fail to require current elite sponsors. You don't have to require a lot of money to build a new platform, to alter the world anymore. Radically reduce urban and rural inequalities. Ennis would smile at this because that was his real key. He thought history of media is always a history of urban populations dominating rural populations that are illiterate or not equally participative. But this is ending now. I will show you some statistics for Africa and India in a moment about that. Novel parities in the means of communication for the first time. Well, first time since speech, really. And quickly adaptable to censorship or disruption from others disliking these political effects. So somebody censors that platform, a million people can go away, come back a month later on another platform. This happened in real time under 8chan, which is infinite chan, where it was censored on some level. Millions of them just recoalesced and built their own platform on a subsection of other platforms the past 2.5 months. So it's very hard to censor this world that's being developed, and I wonder what will happen to our political structures. This is a map of our modern world of mobile ITC networks from 2015. So a lot of change in 2015. Who would have guessed India was solidly 2G? Think of about 1 billion people in a market. There's a book that I've read or looked at mostly, skimmed through, called India, the world's largest telephone book, because this is the new development ability of Indians to contact each other and lower transaction costs. South Korea is the densest little golden nugget, that's where I live. Even Japan has small holes in its 4G structures. The United States is spotty. Europe almost solidly is either 3 or 2G a few years ago. But look at Poland. I think it's fascinating. Poland is very solidly 3G, while poor Germany really can't get it together, right? So my argument is mobile ITC networks are being embraced by people as a very strong development platform, particularly if they don't have another structure beforehand. Or deeper rural populations are embracing this a lot faster and aware of what's happening than urban areas. Anyway, 2 main changes, world history, slow changes from regime 6 to 7, then quick changes. There's 3 quick changes I think that happen. 1, the first miniaturization of computers, then the miniaturization and common format of digital storage. CDs actually were first commercialized in 1980-81. The first rock and roll album was Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, if you're curious about Trivial Pursuit there. Also, the improvement of smaller lithium batteries. Let's not ignore energy, because batteries are heavy, they don't last very long, they don't have a lot of capacity to keep recharging. But lithium is increasingly almost an ideal storage medium, constantly rechargeable medium. It will last on the shelf for years without noticeable discharge, without being used. So those things are coming together, and the digital format is allowing records, CDs, television to all be put into the same digital format. So there's really no need to have separate infrastructures of storage anymore. And that has created economies of scale to merge into the first hubs, and the first real hub was the smartphone, 2007. Anyway, first multimedia hub, that flat glass smartphone from 2007, and after 2007, we quickly enter a novel regime developed really slowly for 120 years of many different sections that have been not digitized, but had their own storage mediums, and they all began to fall together after 1980. This second and third point is how these networks of once very less shared computerized and wireless telecommunications are becoming a more shared computerized and wireless telecommunications, and this is changing us. Just 2 quotes, one from Marconi, describing basically mobile ITC networks that never really happened, and then one from Tesla. This is 1914. This is what he wanted to see. The popular anticipation of pocket wireless telephones by means of which a passenger flying an airplane over France or Italy might ring up a friend walking about the streets of London with a receiver in his pocket cannot be said to have been, as yet, practically realized. So that didn't happen until the early decade of the 20th century, really, when you could call somebody on a plane. But there was nothing inconceivable or even impractical about such an achievement, and the progress of wireless telephony seems to be pointing in that direction. He wrote, after completing these experiments, that was the first wireless continuous wave voice message across the Atlantic in that year. So it's not been very long since we've had a wireless world, but it was very unequal. Not everybody had equal access to it. Very expensive. There was a long line to wait to send your voice call over the Atlantic. Same with a lot of early cities with mobile phones. You had to wait until one of the few lines came open to make a mobile call. And this was now no longer really the case. Tesla, writing in 1926, when TV is not even invented, he's thinking, why don't we have personal TVs and talk to each other that way? He says, when wireless is perfectly applied to the whole Earth, we convert it into a huge brain, which in fact it is. All things being particles or real and rhythmic whole, we shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles, and the instruments through which we shall be able to do all of this will fit in our vest pockets. Clarity. I mean, that's what's been happening. All of these separate infrastructures, once digitized, once having portable power, miniaturization, there's no reason this doesn't happen anymore. Previously, there's a lot of reasons it didn't happen. And this is an example of it not happening. But slowly, all of these things are getting exactly the same digital medium. And that is a powerful thing to hold in your hand. Meanwhile, smartphones grow while all other individual things are dying, right? MP3 portable media players, navigation system, digital cameras, huge drops over this period in the United States from 2007, the invention of the flat glass smartphone, and 2016. This is a complicated graph. There's only one point to this, just what's going up. The only thing going up are things that are small and portable, and other things with single uses are going down. Game consoles, MP3. Single-use things are going down. Multi-use things are they're very small or going up. That's the only real growth area. That's what I mean by this miniaturization. And you can see that. This 2015 data. But here's another cute chart of 37 things that are now within your phone. It's not a phone. In fact, according to statistics 2 years ago in the United States, the phone is not a phone. People use it as a texting device. That's really the major use for it. Phone might be a text device with a phone app in it, for all they care. Also, how many had a desk like this a long time ago, where you had to have separate medium for things? You know, YouTube was looking out the window, right? Or so here's post-it. Twitter is post-it notes. So now that is all in your phone as well. And the miniaturization has been extreme in just the past 20 years. That's 20 years right there. But anyway, theoretical point you may not have heard about. There's two things that haven't been important in media until now. Moore beat Metcalf and McGuire. Moore, of course, we all probably know Charles Moore, worked at Intel. He had the idea that beginning in the 1970s, the miniaturization of computers were estimated every 2 years to fit double the amount of transistors on a chip every 2 more years. And that's pretty much held. It actually, we're not, Moore's law sort of died off, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago. If I had time, I'd show you a chart showing that. But that's why we're developing quantum computing now, because we're reaching physical limitations of packing atoms together in the existing technology. But you might not have heard of Metcalf. That's the network value you get. If you own the world's first fax machine, congratulations, you don't have a reason to own it. But if you're part of a network of 100,000 people, it's very useful. In other words, the value of your product is not your purchase, it's how you access a network. And so that doesn't happen with books, that doesn't happen with owning you might own the telephone. But many media don't have a lot of network value, but the mobile phone definitely has a huge network value. McGuire is the idea that more mobile products and services are more valued than products that are stable, like the table. If you had a TV studio, how useful is that? If you wanted to have a GoPro camera on your hat, or you just put your cell phone, or what I'm doing, using an iPad right now and filming this entire talk. I carried it with me. But the point is, smaller chips have allowed for this network value and allowed for these mobile products and services to develop. And everything is better versus unnetworked development, and everything is better versus just network development by itself. Mobile network development It's more efficiently implemented when it employs all of these things, takes advantage of mobile network service. Why? Because people don't just network once. Once you have a trusted network in your life, there are multiplier effects. You just add other uses for that same network. That's why social media are building money all over the world. It didn't start as a bank, but the network itself is the value that yields money. And money might be the first network value, right? That is acceptable as a network. It's not just money in your pocket, but has to be a network for it to work. But anyway, thus mobile network platforms used for human, social, and economic collaborative development start to happen, and this network value is already being built. And so we have a platform-based development now, I think. And let's show some US and global data before I enter the realm of 7 regimes. This is just United States data. Notice how long it took for the telephone to receive only 30% of the population of the United States. It took over 66 years. But once you had the telephone, you could build the internet. The internet was based off those networks. So once you have these infrastructures, there's this accelerated development. But notice the smartphone itself. It took about 7 years to reach 70% in the United States. This is from 2015 data, I think. And now it's well over 90, I think, too. This is a global world map from the same year, 2015, from the World Bank. It says mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people. This is the 100 line, above which there is more phones than people per country. And the usual suspects, we got Europe here, Germany, OECD, some parts of the Middle East, East Asia, but other places you would not expect, or even higher. Russia Federation, Thailand. We're dealing with some places in Central Asia. I mean, these people are grasping at mobile development because it's their first stable development platform in very weak state contexts. Even places like Afghanistan, which has been under international war from NATO and the United States for 15 years, where do you see technology growth in a war environment like that? It still happens even in Afghanistan. That's surprising to me. But the world average is almost at 100%. Some global statistics from the year this year, or January, if there's about 7.6 billion people. Notice people think we live in an internet world, but that's just 57%. The actual plurality, the greater amount, is 67% unique mobile users. Social media is almost at 50%. And I think once you reach that point, more hell will break loose, so to speak, dealing with the social dynamics of that. In Africa alone, there's over 1 billion mobile subscriptions as of this year. 4 years ago, they thought maybe by this time we'll have 500. So nobody had expected this massive growth of these networks across sub-Saharan Africa, with 1.3 billion there. But they're not really involved with much social media yet, with low bandwidth per se, or spotty electricity. But nonetheless, people grasp at this at 80%. What about India? 87%. Internet, much lower. That's really the issue. 80 versus 36, 87-41. But this is the hegemonic regime we're living in. A mobile network is more dominating of people's time. So the point is, if you want to roll out human economic development, nothing makes more sense for equal access at this point than the mobile platform. World first really from 2017. By 2017, half of the world was actually using the internet through a mobile phone. But 2009, non-existent. This is how fast this is changing. From 2017, the first year, half of the world was on the internet, but already it was 66% of the world using mobile phones. It's only gone up 1% in 2 more years. So we're reaching sort of a leveling off point. Mobile connections by device, the carrots are the important points. Share of smartphones, that's an important year because over half the world's mobile phones are now smartphones as of 2017. The total share of feature phones has dropped below half. Feature phones are flip phones that don't have a lot of access or computer capacities. Mobile connections by type. Mobile connections, the percentage of total population is over the world's population. Percentage of mobile connections of broadband are now over 51% from 2017. So this, from 2017, I think is a really important year for moving into a hegemony, as I'm calling it. I'll skip that one, but smartphones from 2015 again. South Korea was 88%. Notice Japan 39%. You get a lot of different cultural uptakes here. And I'm really fascinated by this cultural absorption or lack of absorption of Japan versus Korea there. But notice Spain having far more than France. Germany, 60. You think the industrial zones would be the ones grasping at it, but it's really the ones that seem as periphery to industrial zones find great value. Kenya was at 26% smartphones in 2015. By 2017, it's over 45%, almost half the population of Kenya. It doesn't have stable electricity. Nevertheless, grasp at the smartphone. Moving on, I'm going backwards, all right, okay. So, theme 1, 7 media regimes. For the first theme, I'll talk about the world history of media for 5,000 years, and we live in this rare crossover period. It's very rare in world history. Only 7 such periods have happened in 5,000 years, and media regime changes soon altered everything about the way people lived. Most of world history is hegemonic and unequally participated, but this is very different now from us too. Think of this media, as I said, from one-way mass media to two-way mass media. I'll skip ahead. First I'll show pictures and I'll talk about it, but think of these as a column that had a beginning. So when these media developed, this is language. When language developed, we were non-language, so perfectly dark, I guess is a good symbol here. Dark, this made humans. We became human as we got language, and people have called this homo symbolicus, that this feedback of language using humans changed our larynx, changed the structure of our brains, and so we've evolved with this cultural use. So we're really networked in language. So it's really of equal use. These are pictures of shamans. It's a world of hundreds of thousands of regional languages, almost all of them in shamanistic structures, which means a medicinal elite, mostly an inherited father to son or mother to daughter arrangement, where if this guy told you, well, you have a spirit, I will cure it. You don't know different. You can't go to a book and figure it out. I mean, that's the only media you have. And your enemies would be over the mountain, they'd worship a different mountain, and they would have a totally different language. And so languages were the political boundaries at the time. And that was all. And there's no way to plan for the future. There's no like multi-generational plan to build a wall or to attack service or to write something down. All you had is oral communication, dance, language, and your capacity to send this information over multi-generations is very limited to stereotypes like the beautiful princess, the lovely knight. There's no ugly princess. There's no knights with a broken arm. That's too complicated. So people have studied old epic poetry and how stylistic it is. The wine dark sea that Homer talks about in Iliad. But the point is, all these phrases were like Lego that people put together, so there's not much individualism. There's a lot of closeness to people, but this is the way we have mostly lived for most of our history. Language and then nothing for a long time. What happened from this? So who began this? This is the beginning of complex scripts. Complex scripts, of course, appeared in this world. So they interrupted this world, or they're challenging this world. And complex scripts developed only around 5 or 6 different areas. One of them, the Mesopotamian area, other is Egypt. Other one is Kerala, which has only been discovered in the past 15 years by Ruth Shady, who is an archaeologist. It's maybe the oldest well-preserved site for human history of habitation in the world, even better than the dry areas in Mesopotamia called Kerala. And they found some early quipu. Quipu is the writing done with knots. So there's no paper. So the medium, quipu kamiak in the Incan Empire, they were still using this 2,000 years later. So complex scripts were a very strong regime.
Where was it found?
This is in northern Peru, I think.
No, so, okay, Latin America.
It's Caral, C-A-R-A-L, Caral. There's a really, really good, expensive book that I have about Caral. Very little in English. It's the first translation, really, of a lot of Spanish things, just 2 or 3 years ago. But anyway, Caral, this is Chinese early scripts and what Chinese writing looked like before they had paper, per se, and roll and scroll. And this is actually writing by the area of the Mayan. The Mayans wrote on bark with latex. And almost their entire libraries were destroyed by the Spanish conquistadors because they were pagan demons and they had to have their writings destroyed. So only 4 codexes left. Like, think about, your country having 4 books left. That's a shocking loss. But those are 5 different media, localized, scribal elites, 1 or 2% of the population, I like to call it the original 1%. The original 1% are not Wall Street people dominating the world. The original 1% were the scribes that dominated everything, even kings if they couldn't read or write. So that lasts for about 3,000 years. Cuneiform did not stop being written in the Middle East until 100 Common Era, until after the Common Era. So from 3,500 BCE to 100 CE Common Era, that's a huge regime. That's how difficult it is to end this regime. In China, it never ended. So we still have regime 2 structures in China. But why, where we're from, like the Mediterranean, why do we have simple scripts? And it's been argued by a really good book called 1177 BCE. That it's not really the scripts were recognized as important, because nobody wants all their population to equally read with each other. This is like somehow thousands of different characters. These are logographs, and these are morphemes. Morphemes have symbols for different shapes of things, thoughts. Morphemes and phonemes. And the only way you know what they sound like is you have to talk to a person who already writes the language. There's no book to learn how to do these things. It's word of mouth use. It's like a rebus. It's like a picture of a sun and picture of a leaf, or a picture of a bee and a leaf. Bee leaf. If you didn't know the bee sounded like bee and leaf sounded like leaf, you could never translate a picture of a bee and a leaf. So word of mouth was really locked into the scribal elite. What happened in 1177 BCE in Europe? About 6 or 7 different civilizations were destroyed within about 150 years, and it left a huge opening for the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians went around and they spread this language, the first language that could be shared very easily across cultures. So it's like the early internet. That's it. That's all the letters they had. And of course, Greek was based on this. You can still read this Greek urn from about 600 BCE. Has exactly the same alphabet on it. Here is, of course, Hebrew. Here is Arabic. Here is some Indian. And here is Hangul. Hangul is the Korean structure. They're all simple scripts. They're known as abugidas, which is a vowel consonant. They're known as abjads. Abjads like Hebrew or Arabic, which are only writing down the consonant form. Or they're known as alphabets, which is what Westerners and Europeans use. Hangul is odd. Hangul is actually a syllabary, an alphabet, and it's at the same time. You write things in syllable blocks, but it literally is an alphabet. It's the only alphabet invented in East Asia, which makes Korea very unique. It's the only regime 3 native to that. Vietnam picked up Roman letters from the Jesuits in the 1500s, but Korea had invented this in the 1400s. Anyway, mass printing developed mostly in East Asia and spread around the world. Actually, Inner Asia, the Uyghurs were writing and mass printing things in the 1400s and 1500s too. But nonetheless, it started out with block printing, and then it gets smaller and more discrete. This is a different kind of typeface printing. This is Chinese wooden typeface printing. This is Korean metal typeface printing in Hangul. It was a state project in the 1400s, well before Gutenberg. This is the 1200s. This is maybe 1000, like 1000 in the Song Dynasty. These are state projects of mass publishing. Only in Europe that mass printing sort of wed itself in a more saturated way. These are like hegemonies of states spreading knowledge. In Europe, this mass printing is more widely shared. It gets out of control of states. And this is really why we're talking to each other. Because we live in a world where the media is ours. We can pass a book to somebody, we can write a book, we can do something without a state monitoring us. In fact, they tried to monitor it the first 30 years or so of all publishing in Europe, but it got out of control, and that led to political revolutions, both religious and secular. It led to the rise of science, because people could share private things that disagreed with the Roman Catholic Church for the first time. There were revolts against the Roman Catholic Church for hundreds of years, but they couldn't organize. They're illiterates. They're regional. But suddenly, simple scripts plus mass printing plus illegal underground publishing, that's Protestantism. It's not just Protestantism came a lot earlier than that, but they had no way. The early Luther was one of the greatest authors in Germany, like well over 40% of everything published in Germany in the early 1500s was written by him. So it was really a mobilization around Luther's writings, but with this medium. What happens next? How many of you know what that is? Nope. That's an original telegraph. It's a non-electric telegraph. This regime of non-electric telecommunication. This is semaphore. This is the top of the Hermitage, which is where the czars lived in, I think, St. Petersburg. So Russia expanded with this network of by-sight telecommunications. This was the first infrastructure in world history that is faster than transportation. You no longer have to put a letter on a horse and the letter goes with the horse. Suddenly, you can talk from Paris to the English Channel in 15 minutes before electricity. And I would say politically that saved the French Revolution because they could know when people were coming much faster. It also probably saved the royal groups of England because England was the second empire that had this and they could see when people were coming to invade potentially their islands. But semaphore drawings are there. Morse code is electrical versions of this, once again dominated by the military. Then all these separate media were developed with different media structures. And they're not really merging together until cinema. Cinema is sound and vision together. And increasingly, we have a smartphone, which is almost everything together. These are digital switching, recording mediums, and tape. The 7 starts with wireless, but wireless becomes radio. It loses this peer pressure. It had to wait until computers were then reattached to wireless, and then we have it as a network again. But that took a long time to merge all those things together. Here's another way of thinking about this. Non-electric telecommunications, regime 6, multiple different paths, separate structures, beginning to merge slightly before regime 7. Regime 7 is really one hub of all of these things, and who knows what 8 will look like, right? But I'll skip this in the interest of time. But all these mismatches, that's all these mismatches I could talk about. But nonetheless, theme 2, 14 terms to describe the media's social, political implications. Harold Innis is not a hockey star, he's just Canadian. That's a joke card. But Harold Innis was a Canadian economist and pioneer historian of economics and communication who introduced the staple theory. How many of you heard of the staple theory? You follow raw materials and you understand the role of cotton in the economy by seeing how it's transported around the world. But he did that for Canada. He said Canada really developed on different staples over time. And literally, he's a normal economist. He wrote a book about the railroad. He wrote a book about the fur trade. He wrote a book about cod fisheries. But when he hit paper, when he hit timber, he realized, I can write a history of media. Because paper was a kind of new medium. And that really drove the destruction of trees at the time in Canada because they needed newsprint in the early 1700s. And they couldn't get it in England because they destroyed other trees already. So he worked backward, like what were the previous mediums of media? And so we got a biophysical view. The Marxist view is materialist, we call it, but I would say materialism. It's about an ideal material world of ownership. Innis is materialist, and materialist, you're following biophysical particular things and how that interfaces with social world. It's a history of the biophysical nature of materials. It's not about ownership, essentially. But he died in 1952, and he typically wrote a book every decade, and he finished these, and then he died. This is edited a bunch of essays as well after that. But empire communications is what he's really known for. Poe has 8 more terms, and I will describe Innis's 2 terms as I talk about Poe. But first, let's talk about Innis, space bias and time bias. What does he mean? So, as I said, he theorized different media have different transmission successes, or in his terms, different positive and negative biases in their communicative potential, depending on the biophysically different characteristics of the media. In other words, some media last over time. Stone cathedrals, oral communication, ritual, epic poetry. Some media last over space. Radio, then you turn it off, it's gone. There's no way to store it. So he didn't think, the bias to the biophysical mediums themselves. Space-biased media are material messages that are socially portable. Papyrus writings, Chinese paper, digital bits, they're all biased towards spatial transmission with supposedly little time transmission. They don't last very long. Even NASA, US space program, has lost almost more than half, I think, of all of its telemetry data from the early space program because it's stored on magnetic tape and the magnetic tape is gone. They've actually called in astronauts as an oral cultural resource. So oral culture has been more durable in time, even for NASA, than magnetic tape. Paper, so space-biased media, we really design things to go fast or to stay a long time. It's hard to make something to do both. And that's what Innes was thinking. Digital bits disappear, paper phrase, and what rots away. Transmission bias over space means little durability over time. Alternatively, time bias endure across time and generations instead of travel easily across space. And it's called as time bias, oral regional cultures, and stone architecture. Right in stone, it stays there for a long time. It stays regional. Transmission bias over time means regular little space transmission. You can't transport these things. It's hard to transmit cathedrals. It's hard to transfer oral culture to a different geography, though both are very durable mediums in their region over time. Poe has some other interesting points. Let's just skip towards Poe. I could talk a bit about his geography. But anyway, as I said, let's take to think of Innes as a materialist in a Marxist sense, since he talks of biophysical variations and not ownership. As all materials are unique, there's no abstract materials, thus every material regime adds a different predilection or bias to communication, and thus political durability or enhancement. Innes theorized this only in media, though I think it could be easily applied to any area of social analysis to think of, textiles under cotton, textiles under wool. That was my master's thesis, thinking of the variety of material differences in different industries, per se, and how that influenced social work. Anyway, biophysical differences of media matter, and then biophysical differences in any consumptive choices matter. Let's skip forward. Okay, this is an abbreviation. You'll understand what it means in a minute. But Poe is adding a lot more. So 2 biases of media, Poe adds 8, and he absorbs 2 of Innes's into different names. Poe is going to argue the world of our media has 8 qualitative characteristics, and depending on how relative cost for doing various things. Accessibility. We could have all had a shop telegraph, but the expense of that was ridiculous. I mean, we could all own that. Sure, you could, but the realism, the possibility of that happening is very low. So it's not really only a characteristic of media he's talking about the expense of actually rolling it out to be a saturated phenomenon. So accessibility of the shop telegraph was hard. The accessibility of a smartphone is not very hard. Privacy. Different media regimes have a different quality of privacy or no privacy. Fidelity means truth to its transmission. Early television was very grainy. Modern television, very dangerously real, 3 dimensions. Now it's called pirating, but pirating really is perfect fidelity. You can make a total copy of something and nobody knows the difference. So we live in a world of total fidelity. And how is that going to change things? Volume, the scale of the things you could mass produce quickly. Velocity, how fast transmissions can go. Range and persistence are really Innes's space bias, and persistence is time bias. And searchability. We live in an internet world, and for the first time we have instant indexes. If you're writing a book, you realize how hard it is to put together an index. But now there's software that will do an index for you for things. But those are 8 points that Poe thinks that we're all involved in. That's my abbreviation. AC, Prefi, Vofi, RPS. AC, Prefi, Vofi, RPS. The stranger it is, trust me, the more you remember it. But anyway, my editions have 6 editions. I think the grain geographic scale, different media have a different quality for what geographic scale they bring about in our lives for politics. Also, what I call human brain, the capacities for individualism are very different depending on different media. And the spatial conditions of escape. Can you get out of an oral culture? Probably not, because you go into another oral culture. Can you get out of electromagnetic radiation? Maybe 20 years ago you could, but it's very hard to leave an electromagnetic Wi-Fi zone nowadays. You could definitely leave a script-based scribal state, but those are possible. So there's different spatial conditions of where the periphery is. And now we really don't have a periphery in our current regime. It's very hard. You have to reconstruct a room that is sealed from electromagnetic radiation to have a periphery. Other things, real-time deliberation. This only happened with speech, deliberation potentials in speech, but now, once again, we're getting, for the first time in thousands of years, a medium where we're allowing deliberation potentials in real time. Mobility of production, not just the mobility of the message, but how mobile is a television studio, how mobile is a recording studio. That is very different than just the mobility of the message. I think that's something that needs to be really stressed, that this is the network value and mobile value of this medium that we live in. Network rewirability, how fast can you redesign an entire network if one node is gone, or a major, it's very easy now. Previously, it would be very difficult. So all of these things, I will skip forward and not describe those. We can come back to those later. I will go on to the next point. But I want to just describe, you could do an analysis of using these 14 terms of regime 6 versus regime 7. The change is sort of plotted out here. In regime 6, the mobility of producing things, of a television, you have to bring a huge amount of equipment to do something, or record someone. It's very easy now. Networkable is very difficult to redesign physical wires in a building if something's shorted out. But it's very easy now with you can do a live, they use it in disaster risk planning, where the technology itself doesn't have central nodes. Every node potentially can be a central node and pass things among them autonomously. Persistence, or even poor. The only thing we're doing poor in regime 7 is our digital medium is not a very good storage medium. We're not storing for the future. Websites disappear. People have tried to redesign websites now under a different format that will be forever stable. It's called IPFS, Interplanetary File System. It's designed to be a torrent, a web based on torrenting instead of simple servers. In other words, nobody could ever censor anything if everything was a torrent. So people are redesigning the world to be totally uncensorable, and that will alter politics in a lot of ways. Theme 3, 3 basic features. 3 and 4 are very short. Describe 3 basic feature scenarios of mobile ITC networks, how they're being employed differently, how we use a media regime to construct this political relationship. It's very flexible. We can build very different hegemonic political possibilities and probabilities in social life simultaneously. Look at 3 very different yet very common political scenarios of these regimes right now. And this is described for scenarios about media only, but I want you to think that the structure I'm going to argue for can be applied to any kind of politics, really. And it's called trialectics. Anyway, equally there are different kinds of interests that compete in an unpredictable future to strategize very differently for what they want media regimes to do for themselves and to minimize the political power of other groups. So the next is the heuristic chart that describes these 3 competitive and collaborative different groups in space as well as strategy. This diagram here doesn't mean royal houses, it doesn't mean aristocratic houses, it doesn't mean peasants, it's just general spatial arrangements. If the world was dominated by peasant local communes, it would look like that, right? If the world was dominated by large aristocratic companies, or like if the Piast dynasty was still in charge of Opole, right? This is, the state of Poland would be minor and the Piast would be huge, right? Because they're on the border and they control a lot of trade. So, but here's a central Soviet Union or North Korea model. Citizens, if they want to be individual, they have to escape. Large groups are muffled or hidden, and the state or a central power is important. This relates to this, this relates to this, and this relates to this. But anyway, they're just abstract terms. Royal might mean equally a centralized public one-party state in mobile development, or a federal level of a federated republic, or a theocratic kingship, like much of the UAE, which is very much involved with monitoring. It's theocratic kingship. Aristocratic might mean equally a decentralized private interest, like a major company, a bank, religious institution, regional interest in a wider state against the former royal jurisdictional position. This position wants to use mobile development for its own interests as well. And peasant citizens, us mostly, might mean equally a small regional public place, town or village, smaller business, or just citizens and consumers in general, and what such small individual or collective interests want to see in mobile revolution that may set them at odds with big companies or the state. The point is, how differently they want to use mobile ICT networks is very clear. Here we go. So if local citizens dominate the future, it would look like this. There would be sustainable urban rural regions of peer-to-peer economies, weak major private corporations, weak states, a local cryptocurrency regionalism, mobile ICT being used for regional sharing economies, greater regional citizen political participation, sustainable autonomous regions, deliberated democracy, voting by your mobile phone, everything on blockchain perhaps, without any central source for clearing or financial transactions. But also, maybe big companies or big groups want to dominate the same technology. And that's what it would look like if we're dominated by powerful global private companies. It means weak citizens, it means weak states. Think of privatized global markets dominated by companies of the USA, Europe, Japan, Korea, or China, where mobile ICT is used for massive global databases, monetizing people's private information, pushing to erode private data with little interest in enhancement of citizen rights, sustainability, quality of development, or participation. It's just bigger markets, bigger centralized control in a private sphere. State hegemony would mean something like China. Mobile ICT used for real-time centralized citizen monitoring in a social credit system that's already existing, with centralized banning of various public communication terms and also central citizen scoring based on their social media posts, their friends, who they talk to, who they are seen with in public. That's all digitized and made of demerits or merit scores. And if you get too many demerits, you lose points on dating apps. You also lose the ability to travel in or outside of China. And nobody has to be there. It's just the computers running society. That's China. That's still what we can do with mobile networks. And China is becoming a very strong state with mobile networks, but it's not the way we think of strong mobile networks, right? Theme 4, just a few more slides. This kind of particular materials analysis pioneered by Innis for Media can really be applied to all areas of social life. I think if you think about the quality of states, the quality of the curriculum of a particular religious school versus another curriculum, those are the variations that are very interesting because different groups would want to promote very different versions of Christianity, very different versions of Buddhism with and against each other. Consumption, you could use what Innis did for media, for all consumptive materials, and think about the differences. As I said long ago in my master's thesis, it was called Raw Materials and the Division of Labor. I looked at wool, cotton, worsted, and silk, and the different structures of both urban economies and labor structures with trying to match other factors in northern England. Anyway, but I will quickly list how mobile ICT networks are changing all four. Let's just skip towards that. That's just a diagram I put together of all those four areas. They're all autonomous formal institutional structures, but their politics gets influenced with each other and in different ways. Sometimes the state might have greater dominance over science and finance. Another country, maybe finance or big companies would have a greater input on what you teach at the university, or a state would simply ban certain kinds of financial mediums. So you can think about these dynamics as common in the past and the present. It's a way to think strategically about things and not trying to reduce things to one explanatory variable explaining other dependent variables, but equal variables and how they might interact strategically with each other in different cases in the same way. But anyway, this is our world, what it looks like. In states, we have worlds of netizens, online political campaigns, novel kinds of free journalism, erosion of privacy, or development of strong privacy developing, social media, online education, ruled by algorithms, consumption, sharing economy developed. I saw some shared bikes out here by the Solaris Center in downtown Opole. I mean, that's all over the world now. People no longer buy things. They just access shared rights to them. And I think that changes the world of capitalism, really, and maybe makes it more economically as well as ecologically sustainable if we have more access to shared items instead of everybody having a model of one purchase, one person. And that may reduce consumption for us all to have that. But all these are mobile linked structures. We're also ending stable jobs, precariat. It's a really good book called The Precariat, written about 10 years ago. Please read that. That's really good of how it's changing labor rights towards no future for a great many people. Some are pushed into these positions, but a lot of people are jumping into becoming online consultants at the same time, freeing them from more individualism, but other people are being pushed into a precarious structure. finance, peer-to-peer cryptocurrencies. Many more community currencies are developing now. Crowdfunding. Previously, if a bank denied you funding, that's it. Now you just put a web page up and you get, some people get millions of dollars, right? So the banks are no longer a gatekeeper on funding at all, and that alters the dynamics of what we get into an industrial cycle. And to save time, I will not go further. I'll just go forward and close on one of these other things if I can. I had a lot of other examples of that. These are just images. Images of those four areas. Summary and conclusions. Did it show up? It will, I think. Yeah. Political dynamics of media regimes I talked about. We're entering regime 7 very quickly now. We live historically in these periods of a lot of mismatch, and our institutions are catching up to explore the possibilities right now. The second theme, 14 theoretical terms, describe the sociological implications of living under different media regimes, whether past or present. 14 terms. Skipping forward. The three basic political scenarios of how current mobile ITC networks are being employed differently. Same homogeneous networks, but different applications mean very different politics. Anyway. And particular materialist analysis, not materialism, you can apply that in each zone to think about what is the medium of finance? Is it going to be gold? Is it going to be digital bits? That really matters on the social relationships connected to that particular biophysical quality. And the last slide, the device importance, why this is not talked of widely in the United States and Europe is because of this. This and this. What this means is device importance. The percent who say it's the most important device, the smartphone, it's pretty good, but it's not that important in Europe. It's pretty good, but not that important in North America. But in the Middle East, yes. All of these things, it's a predominant device. And particularly among youth of all levels, except people my age and older who think laptops and desktops are really more. But really, globally, ages until from birth to age 40, or all areas except mostly the developed core industrial areas of Europe and the United States really feel that this mobile revolution is in their interest. So it's important to think about that and not ignore it. Thank you. Any comments or questions? I realize it's a lot.
So who would like to start then? Because this was a huge dose of knowledge, I must say. I have a question actually which is about the last slide, because you've mentioned about this difference between Western world, we might say, Europe and North America, and for example Middle East and Asia Pacific. Yes, so it looks like you said, that in Asia Pacific and Middle East, this importance of smartphones is much higher, yes, than in Europe. What do you think are the reasons behind that? I think people put more attention to smartphones there.
I think it's really their first kind of stable self-developmental network. It's not really designed for a corrupt state or a weak state. That people see participation value in that. A lot of people even want this in Africa before they get electricity. In fact, mobile networks are leading electricity generation in sub-Saharan Africa. And actually a new model for rolling out electricity in sub-Saharan Africa is a mobile app where you pay slightly on your phone bill and you get delivered an electrical system. So the mobile network precedes, the services precede the industrial plant. Most of people where we're from, we think of modernization as starting with primary commodities, bananas, pineapples, and maybe we make pineapple cakes out of them. That's value-added products. And then that justifies banks, international services. So we think of service economies as sort of the icing on a development cake. What's happening is really upside down cake, where people are getting massively high-tech services, and from that they're building the trust networks to build an industrial plant. They build markets for raw materials in their area. So that's what I really think this mobile development is doing. That people, particularly in the periphery of the world, which are more raw material dominated, peripheral, this is world systems idea, which are raw material dominated states, They don't have a lot of value-added products. They're very weak states. It's difficult.
So basically, sorry for interruption, this might be interpreted as a result of weak state structures, partly that state infrastructure as a foundation for communication and state as a entity which is fulfilling such different functions like social policy support is not there so strongly like in Europe. That's why these mobile networks, they are kind of some form of fulfilling this vacuum.
A lot of people have developed under corporate globalization in the past 40 years, except bottom billions. A man named Collier wrote a book called The Bottom Billion. And during the 70s to the present, as states got more interested in corporate development and a global city structure of finance and money leaving peripheral nations, just sending money to New York or Paris and not really investing in their own country, citizens in different regions were left alone. This was the beginning of grassroots developments or local value-added products. So they've had 30 or 40 years in many areas of self-organizing without mobile networks and technologies. But now, they're inoculated with this, and they're already organized regionally in some places like that. So I think the quickness of this is they've been ignored for a long time. They developed their own initiatives, and now it's just being added to a lot of these mobile ICT networks. That's my interpretation from looking at this.
Yes. I would maybe add one comment rather than a question, but I would like to hear what you think about it. So those concepts that you presented, they resemble what's often referred to as affordances, of media affordances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this discussion about persistence of the digital media. So on one hand, they are not really persistent because they're digital, they disappear, think Snapchat, Instagram stories.
Put a magnet on it.
Yeah, but still they are spreadable.
Yes.
And there's the potential for copying and everything. So
and they're very cheap. I mean, it's just an electron. I mean, that it doesn't require a lot of cost. So it's a low-cost space bias, to use in his terms. But go ahead.
Yeah, but what I mean, as symbolic representations. Think revenge porn or something that damages your reputation or whatever.
Right.
So what do you think about this? This let's say double. I don't know what you call it, double nature of this
Janus space,
Janus space of this persistence or
I think the way I talked about the same mobile technologies building the Chinese social credit system versus Kenyan market women using digital payments to securely transfer it to their bank account so nobody steals it. Those are the Janus. I think all technology kind of has a Janus space. I don't think there's a way to remove it. I wish there was. I mean, I could think of a Janus space of books, and even Luther hated his own revolt. I mean, he thought he didn't want to destroy the Catholic Church. There was none. But that's what he did. So that was the Janus space of his whole project. He didn't intend to dismantle Catholic Europe, but that's what happened when other groups started to use that, when regional kings and princes sponsored different versions and justified not sending taxes to Rome. And but that depends on what you think is a Janus space. Somebody's, if I think negatively of the social credit score, I'm sure we'll find a Chinese citizen that really likes the social credit score because it integrates greater morality in public, which is missing. Somebody's revenge porn is somebody else's true vindication. They did something getting back at that fool that I was talking. So my point is, there's not going to be a single way to judge this. I don't think technology drives one particular cultural thing. I think it's our interpretations of what's good and bad here.
This is what I understand, but my question was more how to theorize persistence in the times of the digital, when it's completely redefined. I mean, on the materialistic, let's say, it is really non-persistent. It's really ephemeral. It's really disappears. But on the other hand, the stability, the coping potential makes it so persistent. And I'm struggling with this particular theme for a couple of years now. What to think about.
So the idea of perfect copies is sort of another way of getting a time biased media. So in other words, you could have that's the idea. You give away your book for free on the web, it lasts forever. But if you sell it, only 3 people get it. So the point is, maybe a good solution to solving this problem of durability in a digital world is this massive sharing economy of multiple copies. Some artists are now giving away their music and just requesting people to give them money however much they feel. I mean, it's a totally different model, because previously, a lot of markets are based on ideas of scarcity. You have to have scarcity to make price structures work. And so this is a situation where scarcity is very artificial. You could really give everybody a copy of my presentation, and not that it costs anything. Or I could steal a book off the web and give it to everybody. I'd ruin the price, but we'd all get the service. But we've ruined the whole production cycle and the incentives that make people make books, or make people, survive as a musician in a specialized world. So I don't know.
Your point was, excuse me,
Yeah.
just that it's difficult to grasp this persistence and non-persistence at the same time, yes? This was the point, that we live in the 7 regime, which is mainly characterized by impersistence, I believe.
I mean, lack of persistence.
Lack of persistence, yes. Just everything is fluctuating all the time, yes? And I think what is the point of creating these free scenarios you've presented to us? Yes, because if we live in a time of lack of persistence, basically, it means also lack of persistence of political structures. Yes, and the free scenarios you've depicted to us seems you seem to assume that there is something
it's the lack of persistence of the media. I would say the structures themselves managing the flow of big data, the human relationship, but the fact that you can constantly collate, refile, reorganize data. There's no stable format, and data mining of all sorts of millions and billions.
I'm thinking about kind of the point in favor of making models of political systems like you've depicted. Yes, this royal one, for example. Yes, or royal one which is now applied in China. Let's say, so China is close to this model. Yes, but
it's more like hegemony. There's still people who hate it. I mean, there's never true domination. I think
it can be changed, or in a kind of maybe not closest future, but
look at Hong
it
Kong.
is kind of fluctuating all the time. Yes, so maybe the best scenario would be something that links these 3 different scenarios. Yes, because can we imagine a situation where we have a competing forces, like realistic forces with peasant citizen, let's say. Second scenario, I think that do we have a country, for example, now where these 3 scenarios they are kind of clashing together?
And that's my ideal too. I didn't have time. I took it out of the slide deck, but nonetheless, that's an ideal where I think there's justification for central authority. I think there's justification for decentralization. I think there's justification for regional input. The issue is how do we balance that? But I was showing 3 extreme kind of futures that are being developed right now.
Ideal type, let's say, in a Weberian sense.
These are ideal types or ideal horrors, depending on your point of view. Because just because it's totally decentralized doesn't mean there's not going to be rampant, cryptocurrency theft, and there's no central people steal things from each other, run around. So I don't know. I think in China, if we go back to China, simultaneously these are in place. When China developed a social credit system, the Chinese in Hong Kong are using mobile phone networks and through something called Fire Chat. They used this a few years ago in the Umbrella Revolution. Fire Chat allows mobile phones to become their own towers through Bluetooth. So Bluetooth-enabled phones now can communicate with each other. So the state, what it does in China, it turns off the cell phone towers, trying to stop them communicating. But literally what happens, about 250,000 people downloaded FireChat, and they made their own decentralized network, and they continue to communicate when the electricity was down, intentionally. I mean, that's what we're yielding a world where, for the first time, media is equally saturated and really kind of unstoppable. I wonder what will happen. I think terrible scenarios can happen. I think good scenarios can happen. I would love to see a balanced world like you're talking about, Bartek. And that's my goal. I don't want to see one of these totally dominating. But different places will see a different version, this doesn't go from me, but Manuel Castell's famous trilogy, The Rise of Network Society, he basically starts the book by saying, sure, we're getting homogeneous technology, but don't assume the world's going to get homogeneous. It's probably more heterogeneous using different applications of this over time, or people, coming to want more regional identity as the homogeneity pressures them into reestablishing nationalism or establishing a regional identity in opposition to this amorphous world. Yeah. I want to pose some thoughts and hopefully some terms that help you think about that. Yeah.
Definitely, we have a lot of thoughts now.
I just have one question. I'm not sure whether I understood right. Sorry. Did you say that one of the features of the regime 7 is the lowering transaction costs of the relationships?
Yes.
Could you develop on that?
Well, think 50 years ago. What is a supermarket? A supermarket is where you don't have to go to 50 stores. You want to buy bread, you go to the baker. Previously, you go to the meat seller. Supermarkets lower the transaction costs. One store, everything. Makes the consumers happy, but maybe a long-term effect is it destroys the regional businesses, right? Consolidates the economy. Transaction costs in mobile phones. Suddenly, you can now contact anybody in the world you want to if you just know their number. Previously, that's almost impossible. So the transaction cost of organizing a conference call or doing crowdfunding across the entire world for the 20 people who are interested in your crazy invention, that's now very easy to find. Previously, you would have to do mass mailing, and most people throw away mass, junk mail in the United States. I don't know, but so mass mailing, is a way of trying to attract people to some aggregate, and that's high transaction costs. But now, mass mailing can be done through a digital search. You search for yourself what you want, and you hope the search engines are not biasing searches, but they quite regularly do, I think. But nonetheless, lower transaction costs are altering the purpose of the firm. There's a famous book from the 1930s, like the nature of the firm. It argues that corporate firms really exist to reduce transaction costs for consumers. And so if you imagine a world where we don't need a company to reduce our transaction costs, and we can reduce it ourselves, we're setting up a very interesting collaboration, like the shared bicycle, shared scooters. We really, you look for it for yourself. You don't go to a company to get the shared bicycle. You just see where it is in a network and you pick it up, and that's an astounding,
So it's actually a social shift, towards network society rather than based on groups. I think it's what
more than a centralized distribution point, which previously was the reason for reduced transaction costs. But now you don't need this, and so a lot of centralized firms are looking for new rationales to exist, I think, and there's a lot of changes happening right now.
There's no middleman. Think about, I'm old enough to remember calling my girlfriends, homes instead of conducting them directly, and I would have to go through the gatekeeper, the father, oh, this is Michał for someone,
right?
And right now it's the social transaction cost it's lower because you directly connect to the person. So it's structural change.
And we're mostly connected to centralized telecommunication networks, but even that is now falling apart. As I said, with things like FireChat, where centralized distributions of even the radiation that makes cell phone works, they can go from my phone to your phone. So, even
crypto markets.
What will happen to a regional state? Will it be a stable economy at all? I worry. I think because we're constantly changing on what we want to buy internationally. I think people still live geographically, and so I worry personally that everything becomes so fluid that it's very hard for any region to have a stable kind of life or family structure over time. This is the Precariat book that I recommend you look at. It's a really big challenge if both AI as well as the neoliberal structures continue, that's the political and technical changes. If all those continue to change, middle classes are going to disappear, and they really strongly. And what will happen to production? What will happen to stable forms of development? I don't know. Think about human development.
Mark, do you have a mobile phone, by the way?
No, I do not.
You don't have? Yes. You don't have a mobile phone. Why? Is it kind of fighting against regime number 7?
No. I love regime number 7. It's just electromagnetic radiation. I'm an environmental sociologist at Harvard. And there have been no long-term tests on microradiation, particularly damages female eggs, particularly before puberty. We're maybe in making everybody infertile. We're probably making our bodies infertile by choosing this particular medium. I think we're smart enough to probably realize that and choose otherwise, but this is called the Collingwood dilemma. The Collingwood dilemma is it's very easy to critique something once it's already built, but you don't have much influence. You really have to be there at the beginning to have input on the technical infrastructure. But you don't know the risk at that point. That's the conundrum. You don't know. I don't think people knew the scale of risk of bathing themselves in now 4G, increasingly 5G structures, which is a totally different electromagnetic spectrum band. Right now, 4G really is something which can go 100 meters, but 5G is a different frequency. It won't go through walls. It will have to be really close to us on a really new level, and that I think will lead to a lot of problems. It's already leading to problems, and nobody knows the true percentage of electrosensitives. This is the issue of escape. Like, where is escape? So there's places in Germany being built that are electrosensitive towns for people, like 5 to 10% of the population is very electrosensitive. They get terrible headaches, they can't concentrate, they can't be around visual anything. Whole towns are being built to sort of detox those populations. I'm slightly electrosensitive, but it doesn't bother me, but particularly mobile phones really bother me.
Okay.
But I love the networks. I'm a sociologist. Just like Mary Curie, who probably knew radiation was destroying her, but this is really important. So that's the way I feel about this. This is a really important thing. Is it damaging me biologically? Sure, but that's intellectually not important, right? It's very biologically important. Yeah.
So, do you have some more comments or questions? Yes?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Do you think that technology is used as a tool hegemony in undeveloped country?
Do I think it's useful for an undeveloped country?
Yeah.
Very much. Actually, what my undergraduate class is all about, I wrote a class called Mobile Revolution and Development. I taught it 5 times. And the theme really is this is being embraced with underdeveloped zones first, and being recognized first. And a lot of things are about sharing economy, but as I said, there's other scenarios. We can't ignore the fact that it's not being used to enfranchise democracy. It's not always being used to create a sharing economy. But there are very interesting applications that can make a more sustainable development model, I think.
But I think she was asking whether it is used as a tool of hegemony in the
Okay, I now understand.
by someone else.
Well, hegemony is cultural legitimacy. If you had a saturated hegemony, everybody participates. But if it's a hegemony of just a handful of people using it. So I think I don't just have the view of 7. As I said, one of the caveats was, sure, you can have a very unequal regime of media, but you can also have a very widely shared regime of media. And I think what's happening, particularly in India, Sub-Saharan Africa, increasingly, it's a hegemony of shared equality. It's not a hegemony that we think of as like the
Just dominance.
yeah, just who was the prison diaries, the communist? Who wrote the term hegemony?
Gramsci.
Gramsci. It's not the Gramsci view of hegemony. This is a view of what it means: socially legitimate authority. And some socially legitimate authority can be representative, and some cannot be if you totally remove. So I think there is possibility for a more representative hegemony, not just seen as a negative term. But there is, historically, most media has been like that. All over the world has been a very unrepresentative hegemony. But one of the promises, I think, of this regime 7 is it's widely saturated increasingly. If I had time, I'd show you how saturated Korea was, but that's not important at this point. Yeah. I tried to show that with my one slide on India and one slide on Africa. Do you have a particular country in mind?
Actually, there's a particular example in Turkey about that. There has been a political situation between Erdogan and
Twitter and removing platforms.
And it's all the time is used by a certain group against the public idea.
Right.
So in Turkey, it's actually pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
It's common that the internet or just mobile phones, they are used as an instrument for consolidation of power, you mean?
I think both are used in a very common way because they are actually spreading their ideologies and strategies throughout Twitter and other social media platforms. And I don't know how to say that, but there was a situation in 15th of July, a military coup actually. They wanted to take the government over, and there was a huge, how can I say that? They were trying to direct people to streets and fight for Erdogan.
Right.
And it was pretty commonly and objectively used in that situation.
Okay. Well, nonetheless, if it pulled out a lot of people, my point is, what you call hegemony may be somebody else's legitimate authority. So, what we're different futures for Turkey here, all equally legitimate from the point of view of the people involved. And that's what, suddenly, we've always had these inequalities in society, but now they're face to face on the same platforms, and they can't ignore each other. You can't just say, oh, that's a minority view. Suddenly that minority view might populate the current social media with a slew of 1 million messages.
As you mentioned, we also took classes about sociology of media, but our prospect was more different than, different than that. Because it was, as you mentioned, it was more about hegemony of Gramsci and Althusser and how these tools used as a suppress people.
I think it's too simple to only have one flavor of what media does.
This is a different perception, and thank you for that. Because,
I think there's positive things happening. Sorry to tell sociologists that, but positive things can happen in the world. Negative things still happen. It doesn't mean we have to pretend there's a negative side to everything.
They usually gave us examples about more like dystopias, how people are being one-dimensional, and also we read a lot about
Marcuse and yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Do we have time for one more question?
Can I ask?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, of
You
course.
did mention that you're also an environmental sociologist.
Yes.
And you seem to be a fan of Regime 7. So
Yes.
what's your take on the conflict between the degradation of the environment in the DRC with regards to the 3 TG minerals and the advancement of...
With coltan and things like
Yes.
that. Oh yeah.
So what's your take on that? How do you
Well, I don't think that...
maneuver that?
I teach my students about that. I show them 2 videos from the DRC from 2000 and 2007 or 8, and I show them like, nothing's happening. You guys need to realize that this is, I teach class in technology assessment.
DR6 Democratic
Republic of Congo.
Yes, just wanted to
But it has a lot of unlicensed mines because coltan or tantalum is a very efficient way. When you spike it into other metals, it makes very efficient electrical conduction. So therefore, you don't need to have a heavy thing if you want a strong, powerful phone. You make it with a bit of tantalum, and coltan is the mineral. And I know about the material flows of all these things. So my goal is not to say that this is perfect now. My point is saying these network effects are happening now. There are things we should improve. I just mentioned I think we don't have to choose particular bad microwave frequencies, but people are choosing them for us. We don't have to choose a mobile phone based upon coltan. We might find other material solutions. I think we've always changed material solutions over time, so I look forward to a time when we don't have to mine coltan at all. But I worry, what we need to do is find some substitutionary ways for raw material economies. It really is, because that's the lifeblood of many less developed countries. You remove that, or you remove global markets for that, they're abandoned even worse. A really good book dealing with these conundrums is The Bottom Billion, by Collier. It's a really good summary of layman's work of about 30 years of his academic work, arguing 4 traps keep less developed countries from developing. And poverty is not one of these traps. It's really structural and political traps, or missing the boat, as he says, where development has now moved globally to other places like Cambodia or Thailand, and it has to wait a long time to equalize, to justify leaving these places to go to another place. But nonetheless, in Africa, it's called the Silicon Savannah. Kenya on the coast, on the east coast, known as Silicon Savannah. It may have huge problems and violence there with all the elections all the time. It may have very low electricity, but nonetheless, it is having services-based development, which is removing itself from the raw material-based development. So many services-based development and digital economies are expanding across Africa. If you email me, I will send you a list of some of the videos that I have on Africa that is in my syllabus. But I'd be glad to chat with you or share information. There's a lot of interesting new development models happening within Africa per se, and they are service-led. They're not slowly building from raw materials outward. On the other side, from Kenya, is Nigeria, largest nation in Africa. It's also another digital economy. Manuel Castells reorganized a lot of the analysis of the economy and said, well, if you just take out the telecommunications bits of all those different sectors, he found telecommunications was the leading sector of Nigeria, and that was 10 years ago or more. So these can be leading sectors, getting people out of underdeveloped situations that dependency theory talks about.
You had a question.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, but you were very positive.
Okay.
Because they
I'm sorry, I'm not agreeing with you. It's terrible. I mean, you don't want me to cry. I'm going to cry if you.
No, it's I don't know, it's a trait of mine. I tend to look more at the.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, if you don't have a positive, if there's no positivism in the future, you're not going anywhere. Basically, you're not offering
Thank
anything.
you very much.
I mean, that's, you have to invent, if you have no hope, invent. I mean, that's what people have to do.
If I may,
Yeah.
it's a completely different question, and you may, if you are uncomfortable answering it,
A lot of uncomfortable questions.
just skip it. It's
Yeah.
unrelated. It's almost unrelated. It's about the MIT Media Lab. Are you familiar with the recent developments, with the recent story
With
Joey Ito
with
resigning?
Epstein?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Have you seen the Lawrence Lessing reaction to that?
No.
Because he basically said that this is something that, but you know the story about the accepting. I mean, Joey.
$7 million or something.
Yeah.
And hiding the fact that they're getting it from a known pedophile network.
Do you have any comments on that? As coming from.
Well, I don't know which government he worked for, or maybe multiple governments. Nobody does that on their own time and doesn't go to jail unless they're protected. So I think the whole Epstein, that's kind of a blackmail network, what's called a honeypot network. They get all major scientists they want, compromise in some way, and suddenly their careers are captive for the rest of their lives. Marvin Minsky was involved with this. A lot of major people in AI historically seem to have been caught up in this network. Even Stephen Hawking visited the Epstein Island.
But I'm more concerned with Joey Ito and Media Lab accepting the money. And what do you think about those private universities? I mean, this is not a private university, it's public university accepting.
Well, they hid the money. They hid it. I think it's horrible. I mean, what do you want me to say? I mean, of course I don't approve. I'm not in a position to approve or disapprove. I'm just a private citizen. But I mean, there's this level of MIT's future technology that I really don't agree with. They have this kind of transhumanist view, and that's the whole view around Epstein is this transhumanist network. They want to use technology to sort of outmode who we are and design a new cyborg world where basically it's planned genocide of kind of normal humans. It's it's like we are not useful anymore, and they think they can make the better human that will think faster, stronger, and then will naturally be replaced. But it's fascinating how once you have enough money like that, you're untouchable. It's not enough just to rig politics. They want to rig the genetic code of their own species and dominate that as well. I mean, there's no ending of, I think, human capacities to want to control and dominate. And this is just a sad example, I think, of a group that's gone on for a long time building their dreams without anybody having real feedback of what more democratic futurism about what future that people really want. Yeah. Transhumanism is another interesting topic. I talk about that in the technology assessment class.
That's why I put it to my notebook.
Yes,
transhumanism.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So if you don't have any more questions, yes, or comments, so I think that what I may say, just it was a pleasure to have this lecture, to listen to you. Huge dose of knowledge, and I think that I will work with that for next couple of days, maybe just to to study all the concepts, and thank you for discussion as well.
Yes, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
today I think that there will be beer somewhere in Opole, in the city center. We
Okay.
are going to have some beer with,
Yeah, we can
with
continue to
Mark
chat
and
if you
wine.
want
So,
to chat. Okay.
so just basically, this will be, we will think about that. Yeah?